Welcome, everyone. My name is Helen Zainzine. I'm the Director of Volunteer Engagement with Reestablish Richmond. I'm the one with all the emails, so I'm sorry about that. But I'm glad you're here. I'm really glad to be introducing Laura Wilkinson for the second year in a row at RAVES. Laura is a dedicated instructor and facilitator with a passion for education and a commitment to providing English as a second language students with an exceptional learning experience. So if you're new to English tutoring, this session will help you feel confident enough to start. So no excuses. I want to see you all at our volunteer training next Tuesday at 5 p.m. I know Michelle Russell is here. She's the volunteer coordinator of with the IRC. So Michelle can also send information in the chat about their volunteer opportunities if you're interested in those. But Laura, you can go ahead and start and get our folks ready to start English tutoring.
Excellent. Well, first off, I'd like to thank you so much for attending the session. I can't say enough about what I do and what hopefully all of you all will be doing, teaching English to students. It's one of the most rewarding things I could possibly ask for, and there is never a dull moment in an English language classroom. And I mean that for both you and your students. So when I decided to put this together, because of course I also work with refugees, I've been working for the last 11 months with a group of refugees at one of the local mosques in Richmond. And I have to admit that they are my favorite group to teach out of all of the students that I teach. And I think it's because they have so much to bring to the classroom. And when you are able to see what you can do to help your students assimilate and adjust to their new life in the United States, all the better for them and their experience here. So in teaching refugees over the last year, I'm going to focus primarily on what I believe has been their primary need, which is more on the speaking, listening side than on the reading and writing side. If I had a lot of time, I would try to shove it all in there, but I decided to bring the most important points to you all. So let me go ahead and get started so we make sure. Okay. Oops, wrong one. See, this is what happens when you're not paying attention. Okay. Sorry. Let's try one more time, guys. Okay, I've got my right one. So let me blow my screen up for you. And as I said, this is truly, I hope I am able to help you all with as much information as possible. Now I can't find this. This is going crazy, guys. I am so sorry. My computer has been being very strange today. You can see it now, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, we're just going to leave it here. So as you see, comprehensibility and confidence. Normally, when we think about learning a language, we think we need to perfect our language 100%. And as a teacher, many times we think that this is also the way we need to teach a language. However, I am here to tell you that anyone that has the heart and the interest, first off, can teach English, but you might have to change your philosophy and your mind thinking in terms of how to do it. So what I hope to accomplish today, as far as your learning objectives, is for you all to gain a better understanding of how to support immigrants and refugees as they learn English, and also for you all to feel a little bit more confident as you begin teaching or as you continue teaching, so that you are as successful as you can be. I always like to start with something to really bring home the point that I think we aren't aware of how crazy American English really is. So here is a little poem that I will read to you all just to think about from the perspective of your learner. We'll begin with a box, and the plural is boxes, but the plural of ox becomes oxen, not oxes. One fowl is a goose, but two are called geese. Yet the plural of moose should never be meese. You may find a lone mouse or a nest full of mice. Yet the plural of house is houses, not heist. If the plural of man is always called men, why shouldn't the plural of pan be called pen? If I speak of my foot and show you my feet, and I give you a boot, would a pair be called beat? If one is a tooth and a whole set are teeth, why shouldn't the plural of booth be called beef? Then one may be that and three would be those, yet hat in the plural would never be hose. And the plural of cat is cats, not coes. We speak of a brother and also of brethren, but though we say mother, we never say methrin. Then the masculine pronouns are he, his, and him. But imagine the feminine, she, shiz, and shim. Let's face it, English is a crazy language. There's no egg in eggplant, nor ham in hamburger, neither apple nor pine and pineapple. English muffins weren't invented in England. We take English for granted, but if we explore its paradoxes, we find that quicksand can work slowly, boxing rings are square, and a guinea pig is neither from Guinea nor is it a pig. And why is it that writers write but fingers don't thing? Grocers don't gross and hammers don't ham. Doesn't it seem crazy that you can make amends, but not one amend? If you have a bunch of odds and ends and get rid of all of but one of them, what do you call it? If teachers taught, why don't preachers prod? Sometimes I think all the folks who grew up speaking English should be committed to an asylum for the verbally insane. In what other language do people recite at a play and play at a recital? We ship by truck, but send cargo by ship. We have noses that run and feet that smell. We park in a driveway and drive in a parkway. And how can a slim chance and a fat chance be the same, while a wise man and a wise guy are opposites? You have to marvel at the unique lunacy of a language in which your house can burn up as it burns down, in which you fill in a form by filling it out, and in which an alarm goes off by going on. And in closing, if father is pop, how come mother's not mop? I give up. So when I first started teaching English, I don't think I was aware of how many crazy elements of our language there actually are. The one thing that you need to remember when you're teaching first and foremost is American English is very, very different from British English, but it is also a fluid language that is changing as our population changes. So we are very much influenced by those that come to our country and become part of the United States, as we always have been. So as you are learning and progressing with your students, I think that when you find those moments where you aren't sure of what's happening, don't push through. Stop, tell them you don't understand, and come back to it later when you can actually find out. So when you're working with your students, we need to look at the big picture of working with someone. So some of the most important things in working with refugees is first and foremost creating a routine. You want to make sure that your instructions and your overall rapport with your students is a repetition from day one throughout. Not just using simplified language is going to help them, but preparing them to know what is coming next alleviates some of that stress they might be feeling about actually speaking a new language. Another thing really important in your classroom or with your students is to build community. The more you can get to know your students, the better off they are going to be in feeling comfortable with you and feeling safe. I don't know how many of you have ever taken a foreign language before, but a perfect example of this is I majored in both French and Spanish in my undergraduate and then did my master's in TESOL. And I will never forget when I first got to go to France to actually practice my language. Well, I had only ever really spoken it in a classroom, even with a degree. So when I got there, all of a sudden, I realized I could ask people questions like, hi, I like your shoes. Do you like mine? How's the weather? I couldn't converse. I couldn't speak to anyone in a comfortable, natural way. So what happened? I shut down. I stopped speaking. And that was in a situation where I wasn't also in a completely new country, new environment, new culture, with everything else being new. So when you're thinking of your students, remember their insecurities and their comfort zone level is not going to be there initially for speaking. But you can bring it out very quickly if you build that community within your group, within the pair, whoever you're working with. Next thing you need to think about is differentiating instruction, which just basically means, how am I going to teach my students one concept and then recycle that concept over and over again? We know, as I'm sure all of you know, when children learn, we almost feel like they get stuck in repeat. They watch one show again, again, again. The reason this is happening is because this is actually how we develop language in Broca's brain. So we usually think, oh, I don't want to do that with my students. That's so boring. Just have them repeat it over and over again. I would go crazy. That is not what I'm saying. Differentiating instruction is when you take the same, say, 6-sentence dialogue, and then you reproduce that in different activities. Perhaps if you're working on writing, you have your students write the sentences down for the dialogue. Perhaps if you're using it for listening and speaking, you have everyone practicing with you a couple of times. Then you break them into pairs. Or if you are working one-on-one with a student, you are going to change roles. You're going to be A first, then they're going to be B. Perhaps you've been working on a dialogue about shopping at the grocery store. This is the way then you can start to bring in more vocabulary by changing one word of content. Maybe you have a sentence about, excuse me, where can I find the apples? The next sentence, so then you want them to use something like, oh, you can find that in the produce section. They need to learn produce. Then you can change the environment they're in. So you have many different ways to change your activities, but using the same content over and over again, so that you keep your class entertained and your students entertained, as well as you don't get so bored and feel like you're boring them. Next one, always, always, always connect your learning to their lives. I don't know how many of you might have experienced this. Not only did I not learn a lot of vocabulary that was useful, I learned a lot of unnecessary vocabulary. It's kind of that situation when you're in high school and you're studying for vocabulary. You get your words on Monday, you write definitions on Tuesday, sentences review on Wednesday. By Friday, you take the quiz, and by Sunday, you can only remember 30% of those words. This is because we are learning words that we are not using in everyday life. First and foremost, your refugees need to be able to interact on a daily basis within their own community here in the United States. So when you're thinking about material, you want to think about authentic context, real context that we experience on an everyday basis. And then you build off of that context. So this is about connecting learning. If I'm teaching a mom who really is having a hard time taking her child to school and understanding what is happening, provide them with the tools to speak to a teacher. Teach them what happens when you get a progress report. Go over that progress report, teaching that specific vocabulary. Work on dialogue and role plays that with the language that that teacher might use, just as much as the mother or father might use. This is how we have repetition and reinforcement occur with our students, which allows them to move language from a learned place to an actual acquired place in Broca's brain. Obviously, encourage creativity. And this is really a lot of fun, especially when you bring in the element of culture. Anytime I am working with my students, if I pull a worksheet and want to use part of it, think about those elements of that worksheet that are not important to your student and modify. For example, names. If you are working with a student who is just learning beginning level how to pronounce words, and you are having them practice a dialogue, make sure if it's something they are reading or speaking, that you are not using American words that might confuse them in terms of context, meaning, and also pronunciation. For example, in my university English language courses, usually any worksheets I give that are involving my students working on a higher level grammatical concept, reviewing a grammar concept, I make sure that every single word in that document is something that they have heard already because it's one of the classmates they have. It's a country that they know. It's a culture that they're familiar with those pieces. Then slowly introduce those other cultural elements that aren't theirs. This helps alleviate confusion, and confusion makes your students lose confidence. So we always want to make sure that we are using that creative element. Have your students, if they're at a level, create the dialogue that they would use. Talk to them about what kinds of situations they might have experienced where they could not speak, answer, say anything. If you're dealing with an absolute zero level that has no formal education, you need to start with the basic. Hello, how are you? My name is Laura. It's nice to meet you. It's nice to meet you too. So think of your lessons as little teeny parts of what your students' needs are and work from there. Again, you want to choose any of those themes, topics, and materials that are authentic, true to real life. I love talking about going to the moon, but for my students, that's not realistic. That's not vocabulary they need right now, okay? Okay, a couple of pointers for you all when you're teaching. Some things that I've learned over the last 25 years teaching English that I would have never thought of. First and foremost, we have a tendency, I know my mother has a tendency to speak loudly when she's speaking to someone who speaks another language. Another thing I've seen a lot of people do aside from speaking loudly is really slow down. This isn't going to help your students either, obviously, because they are mimicking you when they begin learning a language and speaking that language. So what you can do is you can use commas and pauses as your best friend. In English, we speak in phrases. And these phrases, we become so attuned to these phrases that many times we're listening to intonation and pitch, how high or how low, more than we are actually listening to the words. For example, when I look down at this, pause between spoken chunks. Now, we know certain words must go with certain words for meaning. Where those pauses are different for everyone. Do what feels natural to you. For example, another one, don't slow down when speaking, because what you are doing is you are dividing a longer thought idea into a couple or several smaller ideas in English. This allows your students to process better because you're giving them more time. And it also allows them to take in language in smaller pieces. Again, this makes them feel more confident. It allows them to start speaking more naturally in terms of the English language. And it actually helps with comprehension for those that they are speaking with, because it is more like the way a native speaker would actually speak the language. Now, simplify your language. I think this is one of the hardest for a lot of people that are first starting out teaching English. One of the biggest problems is going to be phrasal verbs. I did not know what a phrasal verb was until I started teaching English and went for my master's and certification. But what a phrasal verb is probably 75% of the words that you speak every day. A phrasal verb is a verb and a preposition that go together. They're usually 2 or 3 words long, and they have multiple meanings. So what you need to do is you need to make sure you start practicing now when you aren't with your students, cutting out these phrasal verbs. They are extremely difficult to learn for second language learners. We only teach them on a higher level. And sadly, the only way you can learn them is to memorize them. There are no grammar rules, are no real structural rules. So it's use. It's doing reinforcement and repetition. Now, obviously, there are some, depending upon what you are teaching English for. Say, for example, your student has a job. Perhaps in that job, they need to talk about wrapping it up. Maybe this means actually wrapping up a package, or maybe they're in a professional sense of wrapping up a meeting. You need to teach these to them very slowly and teach those that are truly applicable to their language use. Do not teach any language that your students are not going to use, okay? Another one that I found out by teaching in a classroom, when I asked my students to look up a word in their dictionary. All of my students looked at the ceiling and asked me where the word was. Took me a second, I realized, oh no, they're looking up literally. They're not looking up a word in a dictionary. So take the time to spend some of your energy listening to yourself and listening to others. Start simplifying, taking out. I told my students to look over their homework. They all looked over their desk when I was dealing with lower levels. So again, it's amazing how many we use. So truly, this is something that you will get better at, but it's so hard. Ever since I've come back to this country, I can't get rid of some of them. And I tell my students, if you hear me say them, tell me, because I need to know, because I have lower level students. So Advanced learners, if any of you are ever working with more advanced or more professional learners that are stronger in English, they are going to want to know them. But start out using content-specific phrasals for their lives, for their jobs, something that will keep that reinforcement and repetition. Okay, in terms of the class or your time with your students, when I usually start out, I make sure there are a couple of tips about the students that I want to know. First off, in the best way possible, find out what your students' wants and needs are in English. My refugees are very specific. I have them, I need help with a job application. I need an interview. Understanding how do we interview for a job. I just had this past week with my class, we were working on different holidays because they all said that they were curious about a lot of new language they were hearing from Valentine's Day, then they, from Christmas. So again, find out as best as you can. If your students have no English, you still have visuals. You still have your face and your wonderful sage on the stage, your acting. Remember, our body language, our facial expressions are so important to understanding language. It's why, I don't know if you've experienced this, but when you call someone, and they speak another language and you can't understand them, but it's not necessarily because they're speaking poorly. It's probably because you aren't used to the accent and you are missing all the nonverbal gestures. We rely on those more than we realize. Again, get to know your students. We have something called an affective filter, which is our level of comfort, security, and confidence. So you always want to be thinking about this. I can tell you there is one thing that affects my students more than anything else, and it's a belief in themselves, that they are going to do this and they can, and that they do know it. It's probably what I spend a lot of time with. So I'm over the top for positive reinforcement, and I encourage you to be as well. Your students really love to hear a great job. They love to hear, you're doing better. You need to remember they're not hearing that feedback outside of working with you. So you are the one that can really inspire them to use that language throughout the week before they see you again. Obviously, you want to educate yourself as much as you have the time to about the refugees you are working with. And of course, when you are educating, make sure you're using good sources, because we all know that there are so many media biases out there right now, especially on the internet. I find the more I know about my students' part of the world, the more opportunities I have to bring those in to my lesson. And then that usually, a lot of times, will get my students talking more, because it's their culture, it's their country. And it also shows you have an interest, truly, in who they are and where they come from. Again, authentic language is the key. Do not teach your students words, sentences, phrases that they will never use. Just to give you an idea, there are over 2.5 million words in the English language at present. As you know, we add words to the English language, about 250 every year. We are one of the only languages that grows as quickly as it does. Out of that number of words, however, in a lifetime, we use about 11 to 14,000 words only. So when you are teaching your students, teach them the informal language that we use for conversation. Then move into more formal language, perhaps for their profession. perhaps for their job applications, their jobs themselves. But make sure you are teaching them the language that we use every day. We use it every day. That's why we know it so well. They will know it as well if they use it every day and it's language that's useful. Obviously, you need to always provide your students with as many opportunities to practice with you as possible. As a teacher, when you are in an English language classroom, you should only be speaking about 20 to 25% of the time. Your students should be speaking 75 to 80% of the time. And I find this is hard because many of us are used to more of a lecture style classroom. Many of your students come from lecture-based classroom learning where they have no interaction with the person who is teaching them. So use this to your advantage. You are going to be having them speak as much as possible. So create lessons with lots of small activities that are practicing the same language that you practiced the week before. If you want to build on that, scaffold. Keep the same content that you were working with last week and add a sentence, 3 more words, and then add that in and build slowly on that base. So if you start with an introduction with a 0 level, how to say, hi, my name is, then you might have them learn how to describe themselves in some way. It might be that they need to know immediately about a job. It might be the language for that job that you start out with and the interview process. So remember, take baby steps, but never stop using what you taught the very first time, because this is how we build. Once they know it and you know they know it, it's not necessary for you to continue bringing that into your lesson. But I think a lot of times we think we need to change the topic. Okay, I've got to make it more interesting. Oh no, I don't want to do that. Or maybe perhaps even we don't want to do it because we're thinking, oh my gosh, I'll have to do introductions again. Make it fun. You have so many ways to introduce yourself. Hey, what's up? Hi, how are you? Nice to see you. There are so many different ways you can make that more interesting. And do, because we all know how to say hello at least 2 ways. Don't go overboard. And then usually when my students look at me and say, but which one do I use? If they're pretty much the same in terms of formality or informality, I always tell them, choose the one you like the most and keep it. Them knowing only 1 word is not a problem for introductions, if that's what they are comfortable with, okay? And of course, have fun, because it's such a fun thing to do. Don't look at it as a chore. Don't be nervous yourself. The more human you are, the more comfortable your students are. And I can give you a quick example of, I'm working with a teaching assistant right now. He was having a really hard time in class with stress because we don't learn it. His mistakes really brought out the rest of the students, because as I tell them all the time, you have no idea how little we know about our language. You end up knowing more from the formality of grammar and structure and pronunciation. So really, really empower your students in that way, and don't worry about making those mistakes. Another thing, we know in living in the United States that many of us don't speak perfectly because we are such creatures of our environment. Perhaps we have stronger dialects. Perhaps the dialect in the region we live in has created a new word that is still part of your vocabulary. This is fine as long as meaning is conveyed. So when your students are speaking, be careful not to overcorrect. Remember, perfect speech is not what is important. It is communication, the ability for meaning to be translated from one person to another. If they forget a to, if they use an incorrect verb tense, is meaning lost? If meaning is not lost, start there. Slowly build on that advanced idea of perfect English. I really don't know too many people, including myself, that speak perfectly. So keep this in mind when you are working with your students. Now, if it is something that is completely incomprehensible to you, you need to correct it. You need to make sure that you are changing those certain structures into actual understandable phrases. Okay, this is some stuff that I think is really important for you to know, because it also will help your students a great deal understand the difference in English and their own language. English is what we call a stress-timed language. Now, I don't teach my students stress-timed, syllable time. I just show them this little picture right here because it is the best way to understand it. In English, we will take 4 beats of rhythm, and all of our sentences will follow in those 4 beats, no matter how many words we're saying. This is because we have words that have meaning, content, and then we have words that simply serve a function in the sentence. For example, the word and. And if I asked you to define the word and, you are going to tell me its function. Most people will say it means addition, additional information. What it really is it's a sign for you, like an addition sign, a subtraction sign, that tells you what is coming next. So what we do is we swallow these function words when we speak. It's why you will hear students many times say it sounds like everything's one long word. This is what happens. So how can you explain this to your students? The majority of the world, other than tonal languages that you would find in China, Japan, Pacific Asian coast, are syllable timed languages. So every word, 90% of every word in a sentence will be stressed on the first syllable. So for example, in Spanish, la pronunciación es importante. If I said it fast, it would still be exactly the same. So it sounds very, very even in terms, now they speed up and slow down, but it's our actual language and our stress that changes our rhythm. So if an English speaker were to think about how we speak English, our soldiers would not all be the same height. They would not all be marching perfectly together, because we would say pronunciation is important. Da-na-na-na-na-na-na-na. We would say it in the same amount of time, but it's something you need to start making yourself aware of, as well as your student. I can't tell you how much my beginning refugees appreciate this, because they don't understand why they sound so different when they speak English. Another thing you need to make yourself aware of is, how do we really speak? We contract almost everything when we're speaking. And I'm sure some of you might be looking at these contractions over here thinking, I don't say that. You probably do. I can't say for sure. But to give you an example, if you look over on the left to the dialogue, what are you doing? We are not saying, what are you doing? You need to teach this to your students when you're talking to them, because they're going to want to sound like you. Why are you looking? We say this. We say fur a lot of times instead of for. So make yourself aware of what you use. I'm not telling you to go tell your students all of these if you yourself don't use them, because they're never going to get those contractions reinforced. Start with the more common ones. I'm, you'll, he's, she's, so they can actually start contracting their words as well. It will make them feel more comfortable about speaking the language. Here you have another thing that we do. We drop H's. So if I said, when did he get it? I am not saying, when did he get it? But your student, if your student is a reader, they are going to pronounce that H once they learn the sound it makes. Make sure when they're at this time that you bring this to their attention after you have introduced it. Because if it is not confusing them, why bring attention to it? Okay, cannot say that enough. It's noticing. So if it's something that your student has not noticed in terms of structure, don't confuse them. If they're using it correctly, just let them go. We didn't learn these things. They don't need to learn them either. However, a lot of my students do want to know. Never, ever, ever what I'm trying to say is always tell your student you're happy to explain a concept, a construct. Make sure it's not too advanced for them. Excuse me one second. Vasco, knock it off. So sorry, guys. So Vasco. So anyway, so that's something that I always write now. I've been working with my refugees for 11 months. They're bringing these questions now. Miss Laura, why did he say diddy? Why does he keep saying diddy? What's a diddy? And it'll take you a while. And then I'm like, oh, did he? So then we have a language lesson for that one word. I'm not going to bring out the entire construct book of all of these. I'm going to deal with those problems one at a time. Just to bring attention to some more. If I was going to teach contractions, here are the three most common: wanna, gonna, and have to. So if you want to start with something that will be really confusing in teaching contractions, these are the ones we've used the most in the English language. Okay, one more thing I want to tell you about this whole sentence is to give you an example of how we teach them how we speak. If they come from a syllable timed language where everything is completely the same, we need to give them, and there are many resources out there, which I am going to send Helen a huge list so that then she can disperse it to you all, because I do understand if you are new to this, how do you find sources when you don't even know what you're looking for? But this is an example of how I teach my students rhythm. Every single sentence here is said in the exact same amount of time. Why? Because the three content words are the same throughout. These other words have no meaning that's really important, so we kind of reduce it. So what you end up with, which is a simple activity of clapping with rhythm, is dogs chase cats. So we have, then I give one more beat for stopping. So out of a 4/4 count, dogs chase cats. The dogs chase cats. The dogs chase the cats. The dogs will chase the cats. The dogs will be chasing the cats. This is how you help your students set that natural rhythm of English. If they do not know this, it will take them a lot longer to feel comfortable and in the way that they sound. It's also going to help with people understanding them a lot better. Some other tools that you can use when you're using listening, you're working on your listening and speaking and your pronunciation. As I've said, role plays. Role plays are some of the best ways to have you and your student practice. Pretend you're in a grocery store, pretend you're at a restaurant. I many times will bring in what we call realia, which is if I'm going to have a pen, I'm going to bring the real pen to class. Might be a reinforcement of vocabulary. So anything that I can actually get the real thing for, I use the real objects. The reason is it allows your student to feel it, to do tactile, maybe to smell it, maybe to just simply hold it for a while, feeling its weight. What this does is it allows your student to tap into another way that they can retain that information. We all know children learn this way. So again, we are trying to use the tools that help them hold vocabulary. Dialogues that are useful to their situations and what they may need. Task-based activities. This is a lot of fun. It's a way that you can work with your student on actually accomplishing different tasks. For example, giving directions. Perhaps you have your student and you walk out somewhere where you might be working and you say, okay, you tell me, how do I get to somewhere that's close? Have them tell you. First, you take a left. Next, you go to the bus. I did this with one of my students in my master's program for riding the public bus. Her daughter was petrified to put her mother on the public bus, but she did. After we worked through all of the sayings, phrases, dialogues, possibilities, change, how much money. So you really, really need to break everything down and then think about how many tasks, how many different steps, and then take baby steps. Teach them the words, teach them the language, and move from there. Stations. I like stations a lot at the mosque because we can do 3 different types of vocabulary content learning. We might have a restaurant in this corner. We might have a grocery store over here, and we might have City Hall behind me. The vocabulary and the dialogues at these stations is specific to the context. So this is the way that I am reinforcing all of that language they're learning. Remember when your students are having trouble, you've got your body language, your intonation, your pitch, and your acting, and now realia. I am going to move very quickly to one other thing that I think is really important. It's how we go up and down in a language, because as listeners, we are very lazy. We don't realize how much we rely. It's kind of when you find yourself, you're really not listening to someone, but you know they asked you a yes/no question and they say, and this is when you respond, you're not listening to me, but they knew it was a yes/no question. There's a reason for that. We always go up. With every other kind of question out there with a WH or question words, we go down. How do you like living in Richmond? But if I'm going to say, do you like your new teacher? I go up. These 5 different things will help your students so much because we don't know this, but we rely on it as native speakers. Sentences. Show me what you've written. Down. Where do you work? Down. On the last word. You're a new student, aren't you? Up. Listen to yourself. And then we have this crazy thing that we do with lists, but it tells us when the speaker is done with their list. We go up and down. So if I have two things, I just say, does he speak German or French? If I want to list a bunch of things, if there are 4 things, I'm going to go up on the first 3 and down on the last to let me know I'm done. These 5 different situations, and all you need to know really to start them off is this, because it's something that is extremely important in English. Last and final is how we stress. Here you have something I will leave you to think about. When we say sentences in English, depending upon what word we stress, this can change the entire meaning of the sentence. So I'm going to go through this really quickly. I want you to think about what each one is saying. I didn't say we should kill him. Helen said it. First meaning, I didn't say we should kill him. Let's just hurt him a little bit. Another meaning, I didn't say we should kill him. I just thought it. Next one, I didn't say we should kill him. You should kill him. Another one, I didn't say we should kill him. We must kill him. And then the next one, I didn't say we should kill him. Okay, let's just run over him in the car. So I leave you with this because I want you all to know there are so many ways that you can help your students improve their English without knowing grammar, without going out and buying a linguistics book. Ways in which listen to those around you, listen to yourself. You will truly be amazed at how many things you can help your students do. I hope this has helped you all. I am happy for any of you all to, Helen has my email. If any of you have questions, I'm also going to try and come tonight. I'm hoping, it's looking like I'm going to, so you please come ask me questions. But I'm super excited that you all are here and excited to help Helen again, because I can't tell you how much I believe in what they do and what hopefully you all will be doing. So thank you so much again.
Thank you, Laura. Your training is a resource not just at RAVES, but throughout the year. I share your recording with new volunteers.
Oh, wonderful. That's great to hear.
I just want to voice one comment from Lena. She says she's a former early childhood educator, and you're so correct about teaching children. Great information. Rosemary's asking if you are willing to share a copy of your slides, and if you are, you can just send it to me and I'll pass it along.
I am happy to do that. I will always share my materials. That's part of the community too. I have never met more open sharers than English language instructors, because we know what it can be like looking for that perfect worksheet. So that is something as well. You are always welcome to write me for resources, and I am happy to send you as many as I can.
Welcome, everyone.